Hi, welcome. Let's have a conversation about how you create employee privacy policies and disclosures. I'm DV, founder and CEO of Assert.
And I'm Brad Hammer, Chief Privacy Officer at Assert.
And we're not providing legal advice, quite simple. So let's jump into this, Brad. Brad, we do need an employee privacy policy, especially for CPRA now,
right?
Because employees are covered under this. While there is a CCPA, they had an exception for employees. Now that exception is gone.
Right. You're in a position where you need to be treating your employees as, in a very similar, essentially the same way as you're treating your customers in terms of giving them notice, responding to their rights, requests, et cetera. So having a specific drafted privacy notice for them is a key part of this.
Exactly. And the general guideline is primarily similar to how you would treat your customers and partners and everybody else. Number one, first party data as much as possible. If you do have second party or third party data, you may as well have trackability for opt-in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you're primarily accountable for it.
And it's really about being open to your employees about how you're using their data, especially in the context. One of the more common ones is if they are on company-owned devices or have company-owned phones. What if their activity on those devices can be monitored in some way? That's one of the key ones, because there's an understanding for employees that you need their name, bank account, all of that potentially sensitive information, but you need that as a part of the employment relationship. But some of this is about that key accountability piece and openness piece about what else might be collected if they're not writing it down and handing it to you.
Exactly, and that's where comes in the purpose specification and retention specification, because the employee data retention is a requirement in several areas, especially when it comes to retirement accounts, pensions, and that kind of stuff to begin with, right? Because you need to keep that information for a very long period of time. And do you think of any other areas where retention becomes a critical activity after, like, say, 5 years or so?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you have to be careful of in the employment context is there is state and federal law that's going to tell you need to keep data for some period of time. And so you have to be aware that there is, let's say, an employee requests deletion of certain information. If they're a current employee, that's usually an easy response to say, well, we need it for you to be an employee. But former employees, you very likely have legal obligations that you need to keep that data for some period of time, including tax purposes and that. So it's really important to understand the difference and understand your obligations there.
Absolutely. And you need to provide the same level of data subject participation for privacy requests, changes in information and stuff like that, which I believe most employers would have something like that today available, especially when it comes to, I changed my middle name. Okay.
Exactly.
Things like that. Right?
Yeah, if you have a work day or something like that, they probably have a way for you to, or going to, even if it's manually going to HR and telling them. But that is an important part about making sure that they can keep their information accurate.
And there is also this issue comes back, right? Is performance appraisal information considered personal information? The answer is yes. Right. But now there is this underlying manager comments. Typically, most employers tend to hold back. This is now skirting a lot of difficult questions here, right?
Yeah, there's going to be a weird interplay when you are responding to requests about what is company data and what is employee data. And it'll be difficult to sort through, but I think that the key here is getting the information out there and being upfront about what's collected and what you might be using it for. Because if you're open and upfront in your notice, then that frees you up on the back end, to be clear, to clarify. Well, we disclose this to you in terms of how your data is treated and how we might use your data initially. So,
and there might be some data that the employer doesn't want to disclose. And it's a good idea to be upfront about it.
Yep.
And we will see what the regulations, the new regulations or the updated regulations will say about it, but it's always a good idea to be open and transparent about that element of it. So how do we go about creating the privacy policy? Obviously, it starts with either a data privacy officer or an HR manager or a head of HR to begin with, right? And then you start to create the categories. You get this information into our data flow catalog, and the data flow catalog will give you purposes and categories and sources of collection specifically for employees. We have a separate way to do that, and provide a comprehensive employee privacy policy. Again, right? You always say this, right? Simple, and then more complex.
Right.
Policy, right.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's in some sense, it's no different than what you create for your customers, right? In the sense that you're tracking and you understand the data that you have about the employees, but the data points are going to be different. The purposes for collection are going to be different. And so you're still going to define them, and the notice is going to look similar. It's just acknowledging that these are two different data sets and that that data is used differently. So you're going to have notices for the purpose of that. So one.
And obviously, once you get the policy written up, it's a good idea to actually deploy it in your intranet or in some place that is accessible for all the employees, current and past. And that could be an employee handbook, as an example, right? And we do provide that. Thank you, Brad. An employee privacy notice, and in that notice template, which we will demonstrate shortly, you just need to make changes to the specific links on where they can exercise their rights and sources and categories and purpose of data collection and things like that, right?
So yeah, it looks a touch different than the consumer notice because it depends on where you're going to be putting it, and especially if you're going to be putting it into a handbook or something like that. But in essence, you're providing the same information, and it's really about just communicating the same type of information here. And so you'll see within this notice, there's some sort of different examples of items that you might be using data for. So you're not going to be using it for compiling directories and that kind of thing, but
exactly, and make this your own. And once you finish it, then it's very easy to deploy it on your intranet or someplace like that, and you're done. And don't forget to inform your employees that there is a new privacy policy. And notice communication is key. Part of openness, communication is key, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Thank you very much, and best of luck.